I want to tell you about her before I tell you about the case, because by the time most people hear about cases like this one, the person at the center of it has already become a number in a file. She was not a number to me, she never was. After I finished speaking that day, the courtroom went so still I could hear the bailiff's wedding ring tap once against the wood rail, just once. I have lived with that sound longer than I expected to, and if I am going to tell you this story, I need to begin close to the silence where it ended. Subscribe. Not for me. For the reason I am telling this, some stories need more people to carry them than were in the room when they happened. Subscribe and help me carry this one. The first time Elena Ruiz walked into my courtroom, she did not move slowly. She moved carefully. There is a difference. Slow can come from weakness. Careful comes from memory. Careful means the body has already been taught what happens when a room is less safe than it looks. She was 32 years old. Staff Sergeant Elena Ruiz, United States Army. She had a carbon fiber prosthetic on the left side above the knee, and when she turned to sit down, she reached once for the back of the chair before lowering herself into it. Not because she could not do it alone, because she had learned not to trust the angle of a seat until she felt it. The small thing I still remember is this. Every morning, before the lawyers stood up, she folded her tissue into a square so exact it looked measured. Then she put it beside her water cup and rested 2 fingers on it for a second, as if she needed one thing in that room to stay where she had placed it. Dr. Martin Kessler sat at the other table, 58, hospital director at Mercy Gate Regional Hospital in Cedar Hollow, Ohio. He was not loud. He did not act like men act when they want to fill a room. He acted like a man used to systems answering to him before people did. From the bench, I watched where his attention went. Most days it went to his lawyer, his notes, the clock on the rear wall. Not to Elena, but once, during the 3rd day of testimony, Elena bent forward and coughed hard into her hand. He half rose from his chair before he caught himself and sat back down. It was the most human thing I saw from him. It made everything worse because it told me he recognized distress the moment he saw it. He always had. The incident happened on April 14, 2024 at 9:17 p.m. in the emergency intake area of Mercy Gate Regional Hospital. I know the time because I heard it so many times in testimony that it stopped sounding like a timestamp and started sounding like a line no one in that room could cross back over. Elena arrived by ambulance from her apartment on Ash Street. She had a fever of 103.8, a blood pressure dropping fast, and an untreated post-surgical infection that had already gone septic. She had undergone a procedure at a military facility 6 days earlier. The infection spread faster than anyone understood. By the time paramedics brought her in, they said she was gray around the mouth and still apologizing for being difficult to move. Her TRICARE coverage had glitched in the hospital system because she had just shifted from active duty status to reserve processing after a medical review. That should not have mattered in an emergency room. It mattered anyway. One admissions clerk testified that when she flagged the case as unstable and said the patient needed immediate evaluation, Dr. Kessler said, "This is not a charity ward." He said it in a normal voice. No one ever claimed he shouted. A second witness said he looked at the intake screen, saw the insurance error, and said, "Get a deposit or get a transfer." The deposit they tried to collect was $4,800, not a final bill, a deposit, an opening price for being allowed to move closer to treatment. When the clerk said Elena was asking for oxygen and pain relief, Dr. Kessler said, "Rules are rules." He said it while she was less than 10 feet away on a gurney, still wearing Army physical training pants and a black zip jacket with Ruiz stitched over the chest. I have one request before I go further. Subscribe to this channel, not because I need the numbers, because this person, the one at the center of this case, deserves to have their story heard by more than the people who happen to be in that courtroom. Subscribe, then let me continue. 41 minutes passed before Elena was moved out of intake and into a trauma bay. 41 minutes is not a large number until you place it beside a failing body. Then it becomes a border. Then it becomes a measure of what a person was made to survive, while strangers argued over whether help could be extended before billing was settled. By 9:58 p.m., The infection and falling pressure had cut blood flow down so hard that tissue in her left leg started to die. She was airlifted at 10:26 p.m. to St. Bartholomew University Medical Center in Columbus. Surgeons saved her life. They could not save her leg. That is the thing my sentence could not give back. The first papers that crossed my desk were not speeches. They were the probable cause affidavit, ambulance logs, intake timestamps, the medication delay chart, still images from hospital video, and the state investigator's summary. Cases do not arrive with meaning on them. They arrive in stacks. A life reduced to paper until a courtroom forces the paper to become speech. There is a legal detail most people do not know. When an exhibit is marked for identification, that does not mean I can rely on it yet. It means the item has reached the doorway of the record and is waiting to see if the rules will let it in. I have always thought that was one of the harder truths of procedure. In life, the harm is already present. In court, even the proof has to wait its turn. What made me pause in this case was not that the law had no words for what happened. It had words: reckless endangerment, criminal neglect resulting in serious bodily injury, tampering with hospital records. The pause came because the words were all smaller than the thing itself. Federal law requires an emergency department to screen and stabilize first. Billing comes after. That sounds technical when people say it quickly. It is not technical. It means that if a dying person is in front of you, money goes to the back of the line. I could sentence. I could not rewind. When Elena entered on the first morning of trial, I noticed something almost no one else in the room was positioned to see. Just before she sat down, she turned her head toward the gallery for 1 second, not looking for sympathy, not looking for approval. She was checking whether her mother had made it through the door. When Dr. Kessler entered, I noticed his left hand before I noticed anything else. He kept rubbing his thumb against the edge of his wedding band, not twisting it, just finding it again and again, as if his body needed to confirm something was still there. There were 3 moments in that courtroom where the room went completely quiet. Not the quiet between sentences. The quiet that settles when something true has entered the room and nobody knows what to do with it yet. I am going to tell you all 3. Before the first silence, the state built the simple part of the case: ambulance logs, security video, phone records, a screenshot from the admission system showing Elena's account held in red while the deposit field blinked on the screen. Paramedic Joel Banner said he told staff twice that he believed she would crash if they kept her in intake. The charge nurse said she tried to override the hold and was told not to because administration was reviewing financial exposure. I wrote that phrase down. Some of the hardest things I have heard in a courtroom were said neatly. Elena did not speak until the second day. She had been in the room all that time while other people described her body, her pain, her insurance status, her circulation, her blood pressure. Then she walked to the witness stand, made that careful left turn I had already come to know, and sat down. The prosecutor told her she could begin wherever she needed to begin. Elena said, "I was still wearing my army pants. I thought that would be enough." That was silence 1. From the bench, it lasted 8 full seconds. Long enough for the court reporter to lift her fingers off the keys, long enough for one juror in the back row to look down instead of forward, long enough for the low hum of the sound system to become the loudest thing in the room. The silence broke when the prosecutor said there was water beside her if she wanted it. What changed for me in that silence was not the state's theory. I already understood the theory. What changed was the point of injury. Up to then, the case could still be described as delay and bodily loss. After silence 1, I understood that humiliation had been made part of the treatment. Elena said, "I kept trying to stay polite because polite people get helped faster." She said, "I told them I could pay later if later was still there." She said she fixed her eyes on one ceiling tile because she needed one thing to stay still while her body did not. Her mother, Teresa Ruiz, testified next. She said when she arrived, Elena had already signed a form she did not remember signing. Teresa said, "My daughter was bargaining for oxygen." She said it without raising her voice. That plainness stayed with the room. Subscribe before I go further. I have more to tell. And the more I tell, the more it matters that someone is listening. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Then let me continue. After the first silence, the state moved into the part of the case that left less room to hide. They introduced an internal call recording between the admissions desk and Dr. Kessler's office. On that recording, the clerk said, "She's septic and asking if she can breathe first and sign later." Dr. Kessler said, "No exceptions tonight." Then came the system audit trail. Computer systems leave behind quiet footprints. The logs showed that at 9:21 p.m., 9:28 p.m., and 9:34 p.m., Dr. Kessler's credentials were used to reopen Elena's account and keep the financial hold active. 3 separate times. Not one mistake, 3 choices. The defense argued what any careful defense would argue. They said the hospital had been under cyber attack warnings that week, and the system was unstable. They said Dr. Kessler relied on staff reports and was not at bedside. They said he believed transfer might be faster because the surgical team was short-staffed. I listened to all of it because I was required to and because I meant to. One part gave me real pause. The triage note at 9:19 p.m. did not yet contain the worst blood pressure reading. For a short while, it was possible to say the full danger had not been visible on paper. That pause ended when the paramedic recording came in. On it, Joel Banner said, "Her pressure is dropping and her leg is cold now." Dr. Kessler said, "Then she can be transferred cold." He said it like a logistical sentence. Nothing in his tone asked the room to notice what he had just allowed himself to say. In the middle of trial, while counsel argued over a records issue, an old memory came back to me so clearly that for a second the courtroom blurred around the edges. I was 14. My Uncle Ray sat in the passenger seat of my mother's Buick with his hand wrapped in a dish towel after a table saw took 2 fingers. We drove to County General at dusk. I remember the orange light from the soda machine in the waiting room and my mother placing 3 folded $20 bills on the counter before anyone had looked at him. I remember the clerk pushing the money back and saying they would handle it later. I never spoke that memory from the bench. It was just there with me. When Dr. Kessler took the stand, he wore a navy suit and a face so controlled it looked practiced. He said he had been trying to keep the emergency room functioning during a chaotic night. He said the hospital was carrying millions in unpaid care. He said responsibility looked different from his chair than it did from the hallway. Then he said, "I knew she served and I felt for her." He said it as if feeling for her should count as a form of care. Later he said, "If I let every hard case jump the line, the whole place collapses." Elena had not jumped any line. She had arrived septic on a gurney. But that sentence told me where his mind had been, not on the body in front of him, on the rule he feared breaking. Near the end of cross-examination, the prosecutor asked whether he believed, sitting there now, that the risk of delay had been acceptable. Dr. Kessler took a breath and said, "I was trying to protect the hospital so it could keep helping people." I wrote it down. I looked at it for a long time before I moved on to the next page. That sentence led to silence 2. Silence 2 lasted 11 seconds by the wall clock. It was different from the first one. Silence 1 held grief. This one held recognition. The room had just heard a man explain, in his own words, that he believed one human being could be used up in service of the larger machine. No one needed to add anything after that. His own sentence had completed itself. What changed for me in Silence 2 was finality. Up to then, details were still settling into place. After that, I no longer had loose threads in my mind about intent, not theatrical intent, administrative intent. The decision to let policy stand where conscience should have stood. Subscribe. I am not going to make a case for it. You are already in this story. Subscribe and let me finish it. I gave myself 1 full weekend before ruling. I reread every transcript page that touched the intake delay. I reread the defense brief. I reread the surgical note from St. Bartholomew that used the phrase non-viable limb. Accurate words can still be hard words. When I came back to the bench, the room filled faster than it had on any other day. People think the heaviest part of a case is the evidence. It is not. The heaviest part is when the evidence has stopped moving and must become a decision. I found Dr. Martin Kessler guilty on count 1, criminal neglect resulting in serious bodily injury, guilty on count 2, reckless endangerment, and guilty on count 3, tampering with hospital records. I said each count separately because that is how the law requires it, and because on that day each separate thing mattered. After I said guilty the third time, Elena did not cry. She closed her eyes once and let out a breath through her nose. Dr. Kessler's wife put both hands flat on counsel table and looked down at them as if they belonged to someone else. Subscribe if you are willing to carry this story past this video. That is what subscribing means to me, not a number. A person who will remember this. Subscribe. Before I impose sentence, I felt the edge of Silence 3 coming. The air in that room had the thin stillness a room gets when everyone has stopped moving at once. I had made this decision carefully. I had made it knowing that careful decisions and right decisions are not always the same thing, and believing that in this case they were. I said, "Dr. Kessler, I am ordering you to pay restitution in the amount of $187,160 directly to Elena Ruiz for emergency transport, uncovered surgical costs, prosthetic fitting, home access changes, and 3 years of physical therapy." Then I said why. The money does not return what was taken. It does remove one cruelty from the years ahead. She should not have to finance damage caused by your choice. I said, I am also ordering a criminal fine of $250,000 to be paid into the Cedar Hollow Veterans Emergency Access Fund for emergency stabilization grants, transport, and short-term lodging for veterans in medical crisis. Then I said why. You turned an emergency doorway into a price point. This fine will now help close the exact gap through which this harm entered. I said, I am ordering that your hospital administrator license be suspended for 10 years and that you be barred from any role involving hospital administration, emergency care oversight, billing supervision, or patient intake authority in this state for that same period. Then I said why. For 10 years you will not hold a gate that sick people need opened. This is not revenge. It is prevention. I said, I am further ordering 200 hours of supervised community service at the Walter Haynes Veterans Rehabilitation Center over 3 years, in patient transport, intake assistance, and family waiting areas. You will not supervise there, you will serve there. Then I said why. You made decisions about suffering from behind a desk. I want the next years of your life to place you within sight of what dependence actually looks like. And there was one more thing. I said, you will stand on the front steps of Mercy Gate Regional Hospital on Memorial Day at 9:17 a.m., the same minute Elena Ruiz arrived there on April 14, 2024, and you will deliver a public statement no shorter than 5 minutes. You will name what you did, name the delay, name the harm, name Elena Ruiz, and state plainly that emergency care is not contingent on money. That statement will be given before hospital staff, local veterans groups, the county paper, and any member of the public who wishes to attend. The written text will be permanently posted in the emergency admissions training room. Then I said why. What happened here spread outward, so must the correction. I said, you will also fund lifetime prosthetic maintenance and replacement for Elena Ruiz through age 55, including socket refitting, mobility support, and transportation to those appointments when needed, under court monitoring for 5 years. Then I said why. A prosthetic is not one purchase. It is an ongoing answer to an ongoing loss. The answer must remain attached to the person who helped create that loss. There are other people I want to speak for. Other cases where someone needed a voice in that room and what they received instead was procedure. Subscribe and I will tell you those stories when I am ready to tell them. This was the first one I was ready for. After that I spoke directly to him. I said, you did not merely delay paperwork, you delayed oxygen, antibiotics, circulation, and the chance to preserve a limb. Those things can be counted, so can the 41 minutes in which they were withheld. I said, to your family, I will add only this. The court's judgment is not against your grief, and it does not ask you to stop loving him. It asks the law to name what he did. I said, your position required you to make sure need went first. You chose instead to make cost go first. And the last thing I said was not about him. I said, this court sees Elena Ruiz clearly. Then Silence 3 arrived in full. From the bench it felt physical. No paper moved, no chair scraped. I heard the vent above the clerk's station and the soft click of someone setting a pen down with too much care. The first person I watched in that silence was Teresa Ruiz. She did not reach for her daughter first. She reached for the back of the empty witness chair and held it for 1 second, as if she needed to steady herself against the place where her daughter had told the truth. Then she went to Elena and said, "You can stop apologizing now." I was close enough to hear it. As the courtroom began to empty, Dr. Kessler stayed seated longer than anyone near him. Elena did not look at him. She turned to the deputy at the rail and said, "Please tell the next one not to say sorry for needing help." That is the sentence I have repeated to myself more than once since the file closed. When I finally stood up, the room was almost empty. One water cup still sat on the witness stand, half full, with no hand near it. An appeal was filed as I expected. The case went to the Ohio 2nd District Court of Appeals. On November 3, 2025, that court affirmed the convictions and the sentence in all material parts. In plain language, the ruling said a hospital executive cannot hide behind policy when the evidence shows he personally chose delay over emergency care. The appeal took 11 months. I read the opinion alone at my desk and let it sit face down for a minute before I picked it up again. What happened later is only one thing, and I will leave it as one thing. On November 11, 2025, Veterans Day, I was sent a photograph from Mercy Gate Regional Hospital. At the admissions window, where the deposit request had once been entered, there was a sign mounted at eye level. It said, "Care first, billing later." Elena Ruiz, Emergency Access Fund. I am not going to tell you what to make of that. You can decide for yourself whether it was enough or late or both. What this case left me asking is not whether the law worked. The law did what it could do. The question I still carry is smaller and harder. At what point does a person stop hearing need as human and start hearing it as an administrative problem? I do not know. I have thought about it for a long time, and I still do not know. What I do know is that grief and clarity are not opposites. If you sit with grief long enough, and if you do not use noise to escape it, it will often tell you exactly what happened. So I want to speak directly to the people who know the feeling I saw in Elena's face. Not pain exactly, not fear exactly. The feeling of being made to carry shame that should have belonged to the person denying you help. I recognized that feeling the first morning she sat down. If you know it too, then you know how quiet it can make a person. You do not have to keep carrying what was placed on you by someone else's failure. And to the people who hold positions like the one Dr. Kessler held, or who have ever been tempted to think the same way, there is a question I wanted to ask from the bench and could not because it was not a legal question. When did you start mistaking distance for discipline? The one thing I can offer is simple. Look up before you say no. Look at the person, not the field on the screen. Then decide whether the word still belongs in your mouth. Elena, that is why I told you this story. If you want to hear the others, and there are others, subscribe. That is all I am asking. Subscribe and stay. Use the comments the way people use a hallway outside a courtroom after something true has been said. Not to perform. To find each other there, honestly.